Welcome back to Abortion Ethics 101. I'm a physician and an ethicist. I teach in Switzerland. Class is now in session and we are at lesson number 6. If you're only now joining, please catch up the first lessons in the series and we will wait right here while you're doing that. In previous classes, we looked at the status of embryos and fetuses. We looked at the status of gestation. And we did a little detour by what would it take for the state to have the right to legislate on abortion. And this was actually a teaser for the third topic on Abortion Ethics 101, which is how do we deal with the challenge of writing legislation on a topic about which we are so durably divided. Because abortion is not just a deeply personal choice and one which many people wish to moralize, it's also a bit of a political philosophy challenge because despite the fact that we have deep disagreements on several different issues regarding abortion, we must nevertheless have a law that is the same for everyone. Yeah, I'll say it again because it's not obvious in every country. We must have laws that are the same for everyone. It is a fundamental principle of legality, of law, that laws must be the same for everyone and apply to everyone. So how do we do that? Well, there are different options here too. Option number 1 would be to say, okay, we observe that we are divided. This means we should let everyone apply their own beliefs to their own life. This is an argument for complete liberalization, for allowing basically everything around abortion. But of course, if you believe that embryos and fetuses have strong moral rights and that gestation should sometimes be mandatory, you will not be satisfied with that option because it would be a bit like saying, let people who want to murder their neighbors and you do you. We would not do that. We would not allow a you do you approach on many other topics. Another way of approaching this challenge would be to let the majority decide, or let whoever has the most power in a country decide. This would mean that yes, laws would change with the political winds of the moment. But it implies something else too. It implies a belief that power is sufficient justification to impose decisions on other individuals. Of course, power gives you the means to impose decisions on other individuals, but here it would also imply that power was justification, and that is problematic. And the third option is to tackle the question the way in which liberal democracies tackle questions of obligation. That's basically the approach we saw in our last lesson, requiring a specific set of criteria to be met in order to have justification for an obligation. So if your default is respecting freedom and allowing people to make their own choices, limiting freedom requires a justification. These justifications typically include an interest that we think the state ought to protect, and the 3 conditions of necessity, subsidiarity, and proportionality. When you apply this to abortion, you would start with the default that abortion should be allowed at any stage of pregnancy, because that is what freedom is. And then in the next step, you have to decide whether there is an interest there that the state ought to protect. And importantly, this does not require embryos and fetuses to have personhood. It only requires them to have any morally protected interest. And that is a much less demanding threshold. But then you still have to pass the criteria of necessity, subsidiarity, and proportionality. Because does banning abortion protect fetuses? At best, it is not obvious. And the answer might actually be no, because there are no greater numbers of abortions in places that allow them, as it turns out. And if necessity is absent, if abortion bans do not protect fetuses, then you would have to stop there and conclude that you should not ban abortion. But let's examine the next 2 criteria just for the sake of argument. Subsidiarity, the question of whether there is a less intrusive approach to obtain the same good, so protecting fetuses in this case, is where people will usually propose greater, more generous support for childcare and for helping people who have children in situations of poverty. People who support these programs may or may not at the same time support abortion bans. And of course, proportionality is the mother of all battles, because there is no objective way of weighing different interests one against the other. So here the short version is, the more you believe that embryos and fetuses have morally protected interests, the more likely you are to think that limiting access to abortion is proportionate. And the more you believe that pregnant persons should have the right to self-determination, bodily autonomy, and biographical self-determination, the more you believe that, the less likely you are to believe that limiting access to abortion is proportionate. At this stage in the class, you should be able to understand the debates on the ethics of abortion better as a citizen. And in the next class, we will turn to how you also need to understand it if you are a healthcare provider.